What Terence's story tells us is that the body keeps the score. Our battered bodies are a testimony to the sufferings we went through. The body is a mirror with which we see through the past. I couldn't really look too long on the picture of Terence because you could literally see, on his head the scars of the bullets. Still on his forehead. In 1976, Terence was shot in the head. In 2019, the bullets are still on his forehead for all to see. Yes, the body keeps the score. The body has and keeps its own memories. This is why one of the storytellers, Joan Carriam, in the book, in his description of all the sufferings he went through, he said, "It feels like the soul of your body is ripped out of you." In fact, Joan's traumatic body memories return in some sort of traumatic flashbacks. He struggles with what I like to call post-apartheid stress syndrome. He's kind of damned to a permanent psychiatric treatment. Sounds of keys bring back the memories of his torturer's life in the prison. In fact, up till now, he cannot eat bread because the smells of bread remind him of the bread he ate in prison. This is not fiction. It is the things that sit with us. These stories return to us. These stories of Terence Makubalo, of Tabo and all of these people, seem to return us to the original meaning of trauma, which is a bodily wound. So for me, what we call peace or reconciliation, I believe, begins from the body and ends with the body. Therefore, whether we are talking about an individual body or the national body politic, we need to take seriously the adverse effects of apartheid on the body. My second point is on death and dying. And I take my first story from Nicholas Msizi, whom I assume is still alive. But in describing the atrocities of August 12, 1976, he said, "What killed me was August 12, 1976. This profound statement tells us that there are many ways of dying in apartheid and post-apartheid South Africa. And I think this kind of death that Nicholas talks about is some sort of social death that is a result of centuries of racial oppression. There are many people who are physically alive, but who died in 1976 because they witnessed the obnoxious obscenity of apartheid violence. Nicholas died in 1976 because he witnessed the physical death of a young boy named Kolile. He describes the occurrence as follows. Kolile was here next to me on my left. We were passing the police station by the Methodist church when the police started shooting at us. All of a sudden, Kolile was shot in the head. The bullets went past me. He was a young boy. That crippled me. They shot him in broad daylight. There was no warning. We wanted to attend his burial, but we were not allowed to." I mean, one of the things that is striking about this particular statement is also how there's the presentness. Like he was saying, he was here. Like I could almost imagine that he was demonstrating with his hand, like he was right here beside me. So that's also the one of the things about trauma. It feels really present, and that's why I'm arguing that the present is still, the past is still very much present on an individual and yet collective national level. There is a lot to unpack from this statement, from survivor's guilt to the immediacy and presentness of the past. But what I find profoundly touching in Nicholas's statement is that when we witness the death of a loved one, something also dies in us. To put it differently, Nicholas's statement seems to suggest that the loss of a beloved is also the loss of some parts of our selfhood. And this leads to my next point, which also comes from the last sentence in that statement. We wanted to attend his burial, but we're not allowed to. Of course, it doesn't say the reason why they were not allowed to attend the burial, but drawing from the other stories in the book, it seems to me that The dead are yet to be given a befitting burial. The dead have not been laid to rest properly. Their spirits are roaming about. This reminds me of a line from Sisonke Msimang's book, Always Another Country, where in the wake of Marikana massacre, she said, "Living in South Africa is like living in a haunted house. There are ghosts everywhere, and they seem to be gathering force." It seems to me that in apartheid and even post-apartheid South Africa, it is not only black lives that are ungrievable, but also black deaths. They are unmournable. From my own tribe, we have a proverb that says, when a dead man is not properly buried, his ghost will haunt the living. In today's South Africa, many families are still looking for the bodies of their loved ones, which were destroyed by apartheid. In fact, in the book, Fatmeda also tells of how they were not allowed to bury one of the activists who died during the protest, by the name Ashley Crail. Kollega, one of the storytellers in the book, also tells of how, till today, they don't know the cause of our brother's death. And they were not even there when he was buried. They don't know how he was buried. These are the stories that sit with us. Stories of loss of loved ones, loss of inheritance, loss of land, loss of property, loss of opportunities. My question then is, how do we think about this complex cartography of personal and collective losses? What meaning can we make of the loss that emerges from the failed promises of freedom and democracy? For me, one way to think about it is through the lens of what I have called post-apartheid melancholia. Because of time, I won't be able to elaborate on this term here, but it's an idea that I borrowed from Paul Gilroy in his book Post-Colonial Melancholia, where he argues that Britain's unresolved relationship with our atrocious imperial history led to a kind of national melancholia, which produced a complex matrix of shame, guilt, denialism, and sometimes silence. In the same vein, it is very clear to us that the past remains an unfinished business in South Africa. Hence, melancholia, which should not be confused with the feeling of melancholy, is an affective structure of everyday life in post-apartheid South Africa. Post-colonial melancholia is not the inability to mourn the past, but the inability to be consoled in the face of an hypertrophy of memory. It is the inability, not refusal, to find closure to a history of trauma and a trauma of history. It stems from the compulsive return of the repressed, the disconcerting specters of apartheid. Post-apartheid melancholia, to me, is multi-layered. It is not only racialized, but also classed, gendered, and intergenerational. It is precisely in the stories that sit with us. Melancholia is not necessarily dystopian or pathological. It is not always about gloom and doom. It also has creative possibilities. It allows for redemptive narratives, and it can inspire actions towards social transformation. The interminable nature of mourning, which characterizes post-apartheid melancholia, is challenging us not to simplistically move on, but maybe move forward, while still bearing the heavy yoke of history on our shoulders. It makes us to sit with the uneasiness of our past, and to reckon with the fact that reconciliation is and is always a continuous process.